Hi, my name is Toby Sanger, and I run a small advocacy organization called Canadians for Tax Fairness. Well, ordinary Canadians might not realize it, but government revenues as a share of the economy are actually quite a bit lower now than they have been for many decades. And that's because the type of tax cuts that have gone on have largely benefited corporations and the wealthy. They haven't benefited ordinary Canadians. So we've had increased tax loopholes, we've had cuts in corporate tax rates, we've had greater tax avoidance by large corporations and wealthy people. And it's got to the state that the top 1%, the wealthiest people in Canada, pay a lower overall rate of tax than all other income groups in Canada, including the poorest 10%. So this has created a number of different problems. It's led to increasing inequality, both between different income groups, but also between different sectors of the economy. So we have a corporate sector that now has massive surpluses. They've got about $500 billion in cash on their books. Meanwhile, we have a household sector that is in debt. Individuals are increasingly in debt, and this was actually one of the big causes for the financial crisis of 2008, 2009, which economic experts called a balance sheet recession, because it was really to do with the assets and debts of the different sectors. It's also led to increasing not just inequality, but also increased corporate concentration. So increased monopolization, growth of large corporations, which has led to less innovation and less economic growth. So this can be turned around by more progressive taxes, increasing taxes on the rich, closing loopholes, increasing taxes on large corporations, and that'll have two impacts. One is we should have a more stable economy, but we'd also have a stronger growing economy. And that is because workers spend just about all the money that they receive. Meanwhile, rich people keep it in their bank accounts, and corporations also keep it on their bank accounts, and they're not investing in the economy. So just in a kind of Keynesian sense, we could have a stronger growing economy. The other reason is that public services, spending on public services, on education, health, infrastructure, community services, is better for the economy, creates more jobs, and strengthens the economy, and less leaks out of the country in these ways. And this is pretty widely acknowledged. Like even the Department of Finance under Stephen Harper published in one of the budgets they published these multipliers showing that there was much greater economic stimulus from government spending on those services. And then the other side is that also spending on government services and tends to create much better jobs, better paid and better quality jobs, and more stable jobs than the private sector. Yeah, I mean that's a very good question, and it's also related to the economic issues there. It's been interesting while private corporations have got more and more money on their books, but they're not investing it in their own businesses, in productive capacity, in the economy, building factories or in the private sector. But there's more and more, they've got more and more pressure and more keen to cannibalize the public sector. I mean, that's partly because there isn't demand there, they've got too much money, there are too much profits, so they're basically trying to cannibalize the public sector. And it's interesting, P3s are largely being driven. I've been to some of the conferences It's actually Canada has some of the largest P3 conferences in the world, and it's mostly it's right in the heart of Bay Street at the Royal York Hotel usually, and it's driven by finance people, and they see P3s as a way of making higher returns, higher and secure returns, basically off the public purse. There are a number of different problems with them. The first problem is that P3s cost far more than if the public sector used traditional procurement and managed the project themselves. Now the thing is that this is always hidden. I had looked over, dozens of different P3s, and none of them the governments would reveal the true costs of them. I've had one-on-one meetings with ministers of finance that promised to release the details, and they never did. So the second problem with them is that they're highly secretive, and they're able to keep the details of their operations in secret, and this has also led to a lot of corruption. We've had a number of P3s, the one in Montreal that was involved in a high level of corruption with Arthur Porter. Some people may remember that. SNC Lavalin was involved in that. So that's a real problem. It's lack of transparency for the public, and the third problem with them is that it's often generally lower quality service. And often higher costs for the public, and often they're not universal. So some of the P3s that have been established, particularly schools, they won't make the facilities available for the public in different areas. So they cost more, and it's also lower quality jobs for people. A fourth reason is that they're building up all this debt on the public books that is hidden. And it's hidden partly because the public accounting rules, which are actually largely written and controlled by the big accounting firms that profit from P3s, allow these things to not be disclosed to the public. So there's a real hidden game here of increasing debt in this way. And then a number of these P3s are also the companies that control them are often established in tax havens. So they take the public money and they siphon it off to tax havens. Also, another thing about P3s is that the politicians are able to kind of wash themselves of responsibility for these projects. Since they're not taking responsibility in any way for these projects, they often undermine the public sector. They point to this nice, shiny P3 project and use that to undermine the public sector and public services in a lot of different ways. That's a very good question, and I think most people aren't aware of the significance of and the degree of the international tax dodging that takes place. Just early in the past year, the International Monetary Fund, which is hardly a hotbed of radicalism, came out with a study that said that over $650 billion US was lost by governments to tax dodging by multinational corporations worldwide. Worked out to about 1% of GDP for countries in the OECD like Canada, but the countries that lose the most are lower income developing countries in Africa, in particular. And there are also countries that have the most need of this revenue to pay for basic public services. So it's a real problem. And finally, the international community has come together to take some action on these issues. The superstars of international corporate tax dodging are e-commerce companies such as Google, Facebook, Amazon, Uber is one of those as well. Uber was set up before it was established. It was set up to avoid taxes on a whole lot of different levels. So it's the largest corporations in the world that benefit the most from this type of tax dodging. That's bad for the economy as we're getting more and more corporate concentration. It's also been bad for democracy as well. A massive amount of the advertising dollars that are spent in Canada, a significant majority of it goes to Google and Facebook, which has decimated some of the media industry in Canada, and newspapers. I found it interesting. I mean, we're in a bookstore here. This bookstore probably pays more in corporate tax in Canada than Amazon does. So it's been really bad for the economy, and it's really unfair. And what is on the table right now? There are some discussions on the table about instituting some rules that are basically similar to the way that we allocate corporate income for tax purposes between provinces in Canada. It's a simple sort of allocation process, but also one that would treat multinational enterprises as a single entity instead of having them be able to set up a subsidiary and shift all their profits to Switzerland or to Bermuda or to Ireland. So treat them as one entity. Two, have a global minimum corporate tax rate, and then three, have a system of formulary apportionment similar to what we have in Canada. And the question is, why hasn't Canada done more, particularly when we have a model that we could provide to the world? It's partly puzzled me. I don't like to think that things are so driven politically, but there's a lot of power from the large corporations. The Googles, Facebooks, and Microsoft and others, they've been smart enough. They've hired very prominent liberals. We look at as their government relations people. So I think that there's a bit of an unwillingness at that level enact some sort of change, and so there's a lot of corporate power there. The only reason why there has been any movement so far is because the public in different countries have expressed their outrage and forced governments to take action. And some governments have taken individual action in different ways, and so that has forced the international community and even businesses to get together to say we want an international solution to this. Now, Canada hasn't said anything. Finance Minister Morneau has said we're waiting for an international solution. But the thing is that there wouldn't have been any international action if individual countries hadn't taken any action. Ironically, I mean, an interesting thing is that even the U.S. took some action. This is Trump who instituted some laws. He reduced the corporate tax rate, but he actually brought in some laws that would force some of the companies in Silicon Valley to pay more tax. I think he wasn't a friend of Silicon Valley and the people that run Silicon Valley, so it's probably pretty easy for him to do. But he increased the taxes on that. We need that individual action. We need that public pressure on our governments to take some action, and then that can force the international community to move on this. Yeah, that's an interesting question. Should there be there's been a minimum wage which has been way too low for too long, and a lot of people said that there should be a maximum wage. I like Bernie Sanders' proposal. He unveiled a proposal in the fall, which would say that increase the corporate tax rate for any corporations that paid their CEOs or any of their executives more than 50 times what their average worker is paid. I think that makes a lot of sense. We just worked with the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives on a report on their CEO salaries, and it was interesting to see how many large corporations and significantly sized corporations in Canada pay their executives, their top 5 executives, more in executive salaries than they pay in income tax. There's a substantial number of those. For a lot of sports teams, they've got salary caps. They seem to be at a high level, but but I certainly think that we should be. There are ways that we can restrict some of the ridiculously high compensation that different people, and particularly executives, receive.